Brother Luca was the youngest in the order. Gentle hands. Quiet spirit. Always watching Francis. Not like a follower, but like someone trying to remember what holiness looked like before it was taught. He never led. He never preached. But when Francis walked, Luca walked near. When Francis knelt, Luca knelt deeper. He didn't envy him. He revered him. One morning, as the sun rose pale across the cloister stones, a rider arrived. Well-fed horse. Fine cloak. A face shaped by pride. Not prayer. He asked for Francis. He would not sit. He would not remove his gloves. "My son," he said, "heard your brother preach. And now he will not return to our home. He says God has claimed him. But he was mine first." Francis was away. 3 days' walk north. Luca stepped forward. He listens to God now. He said quietly. The man's eyes narrowed. "Then it was your Francis. And I hold him responsible." Luca's chest tightened. If they sent men, if they brought shame, the peace would fracture. So Luca answered. He never spoke to your son. He had no part in it. A lie. Soft. Protective. Immediate. The man paused. Then nodded. And left. Luca stood alone in the courtyard. Sunlight on his face. Hands steady. He had done it. For Francis. And for the peace of the house. And for the soul. Of a man. Not ready to hear the truth. The courtyard returned to silence. The other brothers resumed their work. No one questioned the visitor. No one asked what was said. Luca helped carry water. He washed the chapel floor. He prayed, as he always had. But something was missing. The words came. But the warmth didn't. The next morning, he rose with the bell. Lit a candle. Knelt beside his cot. And whispered his first prayer of the day. It felt thin. Like breath spoken into empty air. He tried again. Slower. Softer. Still nothing. No stir of joy. No trace of God's nearness. That closeness he had always felt like a shawl around his shoulders. Before he even said amen. Now. Just space. Not dark. Not cold. Just absent. At midday, he saw Francis returning. Dusty, smiling, weary. Luca embraced him. Listened to the stories. Laughed with the others. But something in him remained. Quiet. Not from guilt. He had lied for love. And Francis didn't suspect a thing. But when they prayed that evening, side by side as always, Luca felt something in Francis's voice rise upward. And something in his own stay low. As if only one of them was still being heard. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet. Luca still rose before the sun. Still worked beside the brothers. Still smiled when spoken to. But in prayer, he began to speak less. Not by choice. By instinct. Because the silence felt deeper than his words could reach. One morning, while trimming herbs for the infirmary. He heard Brother Matteo humming near the garden wall. A hymn. Soft and joyful. Luca tried to join him, just a whisper of the melody. But the sound caught in his throat. It didn't feel false. It felt foreign. Like joy had become a language he no longer spoke. At Mass, he knelt with the others. He bowed when Francis raised the host. But he could not feel the holiness of the moment. He watched the candles flicker. He listened to the Latin. He watched Francis's hands, always still, always gentle. But in his chest, everything remained dry. That night, he sat alone in the corridor. Outside the chapel, Francis passed him, paused, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're quiet lately," he said. Luca smiled. Softly. Forced. "Just tired," he whispered. Francis nodded. As if he believed him. But as he walked on, Luca felt something inside pull further back. It wasn't shame. And it wasn't fear. It was the slow, widening space where God used to be. On the seventh day, Luca stood at the edge of the cloister garden, watching the wind move through the fig trees. It was the hour of rest. Most brothers had retired. But he remained still. Not from duty. From distance. Something in him no longer moved with the others. Francis passed behind him. He said nothing. Only glanced. Then turned away. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't disappointment. It was trust. And that, Luca realized, was the heaviest part. Francis trusted him. Always had. Would have forgiven him instantly. If only he knew. But Luca had lied to protect him. To shield the peace of the order. To keep the flame alive. In a world always reaching to smother it. He had done good. He told himself. But each time he whispered that, the silence grew heavier. That evening, as the brothers recited Vespers, Luca's lips moved with the words. But his spirit did not rise. He no longer felt unseen. He felt unreachable. And for the first time, he began to wonder. What if the lie I told didn't protect Francis at all? What if it only protected my fear? The question stayed with him into the night. And when he finally slept, his dreams were empty. Not dark. Not violent. Just blank. Like a sky. With no stars. Days passed. Weeks, maybe. Luca stopped counting. He still served. Still washed the floors. Still prayed with the others. But his joy had become memory. Not rebellion. Not despair. Just distance. He no longer looked for signs. He no longer asked for presents. He simply accepted that something inside him had gone still. One morning, while repairing the sandals of a visiting friar, he heard Francis speaking in the next room. Gentle voice. Clear. Woven with the warmth of heaven. The friar laughed. Gave thanks. Said he had never heard holiness speak so plainly. Luca smiled. Then lowered his eyes. Because he remembered. When he, too, had felt that holiness. Just by being near. But now. It was like watching sunlight. Through glass. He could no longer break. That night. He knelt before the crucifix. Alone. No candle. No sound. He didn't confess. He didn't explain. He just whispered. It wasn't pride. I only wanted peace. I only wanted to protect him. I didn't think you would leave. The silence held. Not cold. Not cruel. Just. Unchanged. And in that silence, Luca felt something true. Love may cover a multitude of sins. But not when the sin stays hidden. The silence had become his companion. It followed him into prayer. It sat beside him at meals. It waited in his chest. As he worked. Not punishing. Not pressing. Just unmoving. Francis remained kind. He never asked. Never probed. Never assumed. And that made it harder. Because Luca knew. That even now. He was loved. But love. Had not brought peace. Only. Wait. One night, after Compline. Luca remained in the chapel. Long after the others had gone. He knelt. He bowed his head. But no words came. Not because he was afraid. Not because he was hiding. Because there was nothing left in him. To say. The silence wasn't outside anymore. It was. Inside. Francis entered softly. He moved to kneel beside him. Said nothing. But as he touched the floor, Luca crumpled. Not from pain. Not from drama. Just. Quiet collapse. His body folded forward. His hands open. His head resting on the cold stone. Still breathing. Still awake. But broken. In the only way a soul breaks. When it has held something too long. And for too long. Alone. Francis didn't speak. Not yet. He only stayed beside him. In silence. And this time. That silence felt different. Not empty. Not cold. But. Ready. They remained there. For a long time. Two brothers. Kneeling in a quiet chapel. No candles lit. No chants sung. Just. Stillness. Luca did not cry. Did not speak. He only breathed. Slow. Shallow. As if every breath might shatter something. And Francis waited. Not uncomfortable. Not impatient. Just present. When the silence finally lifted, Francis spoke. Only once. You're carrying something. God never asked you to carry alone. Luca's head did not rise. But his hands closed. As if to hold that sentence. Before it disappeared. Francis said nothing more. He did not demand. He did not guess. He simply remained. Minutes passed. Then hours. Luca finally whispered. So softly that Francis could barely hear. I lied. To protect you. A nobleman came. And I said you hadn't spoken to his son. Silence again. But this time. Not the silence that follows distance. The silence that follows truth. Francis placed his hand on Luca's shoulder. You covered the truth with love, he said. But love doesn't erase what needs light. And then, God didn't leave. You just closed the door. Luca's head lowered again. Not in shame, but in surrender. For the first time in weeks, his breath came full. And the silence, finally, gave back. The next morning, Luca woke before the bells. Not out of duty. Not from unrest. But from relief. Not the kind that shouts. The kind that simply says, it's no longer only mine. He dressed slowly. Stepped outside. The air was cool. The grass still wet. And for the first time in weeks, he noticed birds. Not many. Not loud. But present. And that presence moved something in him. That silence had sealed. He didn't feel restored. Not yet. But he felt accessible. To God. To himself. To the world. As if the long hallway of absence had cracked open. To a window he hadn't seen. At morning prayer, he stood beside Francis. The psalms were the same. The rhythm unchanged. But when he sang, his voice didn't fall flat. It didn't soar. But it returned. And in his chest, he felt something shift. Not a voice. Not a sign. Just attention. As if God was listening again. Or maybe had never stopped. And Luca was the one who had gone quiet. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. Luca did not speak of his lie again. Francis never asked him to. There was no confession before the others. No penance assigned. No lesson preached. But something had changed. The silence no longer ruled him. He still felt its edges. In prayer. In rest. In memory. But it didn't close around him anymore. It let him breathe. He no longer led the others in song. He didn't ask to preach. He didn't return to the brightness he once knew. But he served. He watched. He prayed. And this time, he did not pray to feel. He prayed to remain. Years later, when a younger brother confessed a hidden fault, Luca placed a hand on his shoulder and said quietly, "You don't have to carry it until it breaks you." The brother nodded, tears in his eyes. And in that moment, Luca felt the silence again. But it was not absence. It was room. Room for truth. Room for presence. Room for the kind of love that does not pretend. He never told the others what had happened. But Francis knew. And when he passed Luca in the hall, he often said just one thing. "It's good to hear you praying again." And Luca would nod. Because even now, even with the cost, he was